we have 2 days together. Well, hopefully you can join all the sessions. The idea of this workshop is to introduce you to some of the methods that we are using in the LICCI project, particularly the methods that relate to the collection of indicators of climate change. There is a second part which is on a survey that we are not going to be talking to in this small training. But if someone is interested, we can just talk more about that after. So basically today we're going to have this introduction, and then Anna is going to be talking about the collection of background data. And tomorrow we're going to be talking in the afternoon, we're going to be talking about the sampling and the general collection of data more at the site level. And tomorrow we're going to enter into the collection of interviews and focus group discussions on how this data is typically given back to the LICCI projects for those who wants to collect data that goes into our data set. And we will be telling a little bit or explaining or discussing a little bit what are the kind of like the rights and responsibilities of people who decide to collaborate with the project, and what are the benefits of being part of this network. So let me start by giving you a very brief introduction, and hopefully if you have read some of the material, some of this will be redundant, and if not, hopefully it will give like a clear view of why are we doing this work. So basically the idea behind, let me just close, sorry. Let me close. Yeah. The idea behind this project is that there is a big evidence that there are impacts of climate change, but this evidence mostly comes from the natural sciences. And this relies mostly in weather and climate records. So if you look at this map, you could see that every single point here is a weather station, right? And you can see that some areas have much more weather station and information and weather data than some others. So when modelers do models, what they do is that if they don't have information from this area, they just kind of take the average between here and here. And this, although it's informative and it's the best we can do or they can do, leaves a lot of gaps or not so good predictions for some areas and from some others. So even in the IPCC, they are calling for more data, other sources of data collection. So the LICCI project in general is based in the assumption, in the idea that people who have a long history of interaction with the environment has a knowledge of what are the effects that this climate change is generating on the systems in which they live. And these impacts can be seen in the climatic system, in the biological systems, in their own socioeconomic activities, right? And this is more or less what we call local indicators of climate change impacts, or LICCIs. So basically, what we are aiming to do with this project is to first have a little bit more better understanding of the patterns of impacts, right? So are these impacts of climate change distributed equally across the space, across socioeconomic categories, demographic, people perceive them in the same way? The other part that we are trying to develop, or the other objective, is to bring this information that we are collecting to climate change negotiations. And finally, the other important objective of the project is to create this network of researchers who are interested in the topic, because there is many researchers interested in that, but typically you only work with your community, and you don't, and the impact of this information is very low, because it's not like a common voice. So we are trying to create this network. So the research strategy that we have developed to achieve these goals is based in basically 4 different methods, or from 4 different aspects. The first one is to create this inventory of LICCIs, we call them LICCIs, and also adaptation strategies based on indigenous and local knowledge. And this is probably the part where most of you can help or can be part of this network, no? Then we also want to, we have created this network of 40 researchers that we have already trained who are collecting data, but for them it's not only about local indicators of climate change impacts, it's also about perceptions and socioeconomic activities, so we can say a little bit more about the patterns of distributions of LICCIs. We also want to do, or we are working on a web-based citizen science platform for the collection of data for any citizens in the world. So for example, here you're gonna, like, if you decide to join this effort, you will be using a specific methodology, but you could also enter information in the citizen science platform, and in that case will be like much less structured, more free kind of data entry. And finally, we are working with, and we have received additional funding to bring all this information to climate change policy fora. So we are working with people in the IPCC to have the voice of indigenous people more recognized in all these negotiations. So basically, this is a kind of like the design of the research strategy, and we are now here in the whole data collection process. We have done a lot of effort in collecting the literature that has been already done on the topic. We have trained partners on the 40 sites. We are working on the citizen science platform, and then we have now started we wanted to start these regional workshops for the collection of data only in one part of the project, which is the LICCI inventory, and this is our first workshop in that sense. So one important thing that I want to say, or that it's very important for the LICCI, is that to make a strong impact, we believe that the collection of data has to be comparable across sites. There has been several research before on indicators of climate change, but every researcher has used a different methodology. So we have done a big effort, like 6 months of testing and trying different ways of collecting information, because we wanted to create a method that was locally meaningful, that provide us data that it's locally meaningful but cross-culturally comparable. So you could use the same method in the desert and in the Arctic, but still the information that it gives can be then put together in a single database. So the methodology that we have developed, it's basically based in semi-structured interviews, and then validating the information through focus groups, and we also rely a lot in local partnerships or in researchers like you, but we also have collaborations with NGOs or other people who have strong links to different indigenous groups or different areas. And this is more or less what we're going to be going in deep through the workshop. So if you have a look at the documentation that Petra sent you, you maybe have seen this very complex data collection overview. So we're going to be talking in this training mostly about these methods here, no? Semi-structured interviews, focus group discussions, no? and how the data is collected for different topics, no? Livelihoods, the timeline, changes of the LICCIs, no? And the adaptations. We are not going to be talking about some of the methods that have to do mostly with a survey that the partners are doing. And then in addition to that, there is here is the crop diversity, and there is also a fisheries group. So this is people who are particularly interested in observations of different groups with specific livelihood activities. So what's a LICCI? What's a LICCI? My talk, I mean, the rest of the maybe 5 minutes, I'm going to be trying to explain what's a LICCI, what do we understand by this concept, and what do we consider adaptations. So as I say, indigenous people and local communities have all these observations of changes in the local weather and the climate variability, but not all the observations are that people tell us, no? When you ask, which changes have you seen? What has changed? Not everything is attributed to climate change, right? So for a change to be considered a LICCI, it has to be attributed to climate change. Oops, sorry. So basically, the whole idea of the LICCI is consists in observations of change in the environment that are related or that are due to climate change impacts. And there is also one important consideration is that we only consider changes that have a certain temporal depth. So sometimes people say, oh, what changes have you seen? And they say, oh, this year is hotter. But if it's only an observation that relates to this year, we don't consider that climate change impact observations. Basically, what we have done has been to divide the observations that people give us in observations that relate to the climatic system, to the physical system, biological system, and human system. And with each one of these systems, we have kind of like subdivide in different elements impacted and subsystems. Maybe if you take a look at this chart, it will be clear. For example, when we go, and this, I mean, the whole method is what's going to happen, be explained in more detail by my colleagues. No? But basically, when you ask, okay, someone, what are the changes you have seen around here? And they say, oh, now the river level is lower in the rainy season, right? So this is an observation in the physical system, right? That relate to fresh water, and then to the element impacted is the river, and then the LICCI that corresponds is changes in the intensity of river flows, right? So every observation that people give you, it's classified in this LICCI tree, right? So you will have here on the right the observations, and then you will use this coding system to kind of like classify every single one of these observations. And the power of this is that this allows cross-cultural comparisons, right? So you could compare observations or frequency of observations in one system in one part of the world with frequencies of observations from another part of the world, right? Because you have like a common base to compare observations. So one important thing is that we are working with the social memory of the group, and this is important. This relates what I was saying before about the difference with the citizen science platform, right? In the citizen science platform, any individual can enter information. Here, the 40 partners in the LICCI project and this network of collaborators that we want to train are reporting more something that it's in the memory of the group, not of the individual, but of the group. And this is why what we are doing is first collecting observations through semi-structured interviews that then we check whether they are LICCIs as we define them, no? So we ask what changes have you observed and what drives those changes to be able to identify if the driver is climate variability or not. And then we validate this information in focus groups. So at the end, if someone said, oh, the river is lower, but then in the group they say, oh yeah, but this is not because of climate, this is because of the dam. then this is not considered a LICCI because the driver is not climate change. So individual observations get validated in the group to get the social memory. So basically, this is kind of like the idea of what's a LICCI, and we will go through these methods in detail on the rest of the sessions. The other important concept for us is the LACCI. So we are also measuring or collecting information on what are the adaptations that people are developing to adapt to climate change. So the literature differentiates between this concept of adaptation and coping. So adaptation is more long-term and coping is more short-term. So basically what we are asking, what changes have you observed? We ask, and what have you done about that? Have you changed anything in the way you do to cope or to adapt to that? And in our definition of LACCIs, we are collecting both adaptation and coping strategies. And we are, one important criteria here is that we are only considering adaptations in which people have some agency, some role to decide on this. No? So if you are just waiting for the state to give you some help, this is not an adaptation. And also that these are activities that are still being performed when you do the interviews. So in the same way that we have done a LICCI tree, Anaes is working intensively in this LACCI tree that I don't have like a visual image, but basically it's the same idea that we are looking a way in which we could classify adaptations that occur through the different climates and through different livelihood strategies in a way that can be compared around I mean, all the adaptations could be compared. So we are focusing on changes in location, changes in timing. It doesn't matter if your location, you're changing the location of your agricultural plots or the location of where you go fishing, right? You are adapting by changing location, by change in times, changing the area where you are cropping, etc. No? So we have like this system of classification that will allow us to compare at the end. One difference between the LICCIs and the LACCIs is that the LACCIs we are not discussing them in the focus group, and that they can also come from researchers' own observation, not only from what informants tell you, because I mean, this idea that you are doing something to adapt sometimes is a little bit strange to the people. I mean, you just go on with your life, different things, but you don't have like this perspective of like, oh, this is really an adaptation, but maybe researchers working in an area can help with that. So I think this is more or less a very quick presentation of the general project and the main concepts. And maybe we can have now, we have like half an hour to kind of like discuss this part, knowing that we're going to be going into more details of many of these things in the coming